Would Donald Trump have been indicted if he'd gone quietly into the night after the 2020 election?
So, Michael, I can absolutely see the merit in both sides of this argument. We can't get inside Alvin Bragg's head, but the fact that I can see both sides of it, I think, is a problem in itself. So on the one hand, I know Alvin Bragg personally. I worked with him at the Southern District of New York for several years. I know him to be nothing but a straightforward, honest, ethical prosecutor. On the other hand, if you look at the circumstances here, we have to acknowledge the U.S. Justice Department, the same office Alvin and I worked at, the Southern District of New York, passed on charging Donald Trump in January of 2021. They could have. They looked at the case, decided not to. Alvin Bragg's predecessor as DA, Cy Vance, had this case in front of him for over a year and did not charge it. And I think the big question that Bragg ultimately has to answer through his evidence, through his indictment, maybe through his public statement is, why now? Why 6.5 years after the fact on charges that will be either misdemeanors or the lowest level felony? And I think that gives rise to legitimate questions like the ones you're raising.
Anthony, I see you, I think, shaking your head. Respond to what you just heard Ellie say.
Well, thank you, Michael, for having me. I think Ellie is right. I would point out, first and foremost, that none of us have seen the facts here. At this point, there is no factual basis to assert that Alvin Bragg is acting in any way contrary to the rule of law. It's a bit disheartening to see commentary and action on both the left and the right. I was disheartened to see this blurb from McCarthy and others at this point because no one has seen the charging documents. It's disingenuous. It's misleading to suggest that Alvin Bragg is acting in a way that is political. On the left, I would also point out, Michael, I've been disheartened to see fundraising by certain Democrats like Adam Schiff of California, who is encouraging his supporters to send him $10 to defend himself against expected attacks against Donald Trump. Here's what I would suggest your viewers and anyone who is trying to who wants to cut through the noise, who wants to cut through the political theater. Let's listen, let's look at the charging documents on Tuesday and ask yourself this question. Is Donald Trump being treated like every other defendant who has been charged with falsifying business documents? That is the essence of the rule of law, and that's what we should expect from all of our prosecutors. And Michael, I want to make one final point here. This is important because there has been some suggestion by some in the media to suggest that these charges are not the bread and butter work of the Manhattan District Attorney. What we've seen in some recent reporting is that since Alvin Bragg became District Attorney, his office has charged 29 individuals and organizations with falsifying business records, some 117 counts over the course of the last 15 months. So I'm going to be looking at the actual evidence, the charging documents, to see if Donald Trump is being treated the same way as many of those other defendants over the last 15 months.
But Anthony, in how many of those cases was the falsification charge brought 7 years later and with some unique pairing to an election claim that the New York Times and Washington Post say is novel and risky? That's not like Drudge and Breitbart. That's the Washington Post and New York Times say, wow, man, this is unprecedented.
So, Michael, I hear the question. It's the right question. I think that we should all just take a step back. We don't know the evidence. We don't know. We know that a lot of individuals, including people from the Trump campaign, have gone and visited the grand jury. There's a lot we don't know here. And so I would encourage everyone to take a step back. Let's read the documents and remember that if we go down this road, it might be unique for us, but other major democracies, including France and Israel and others, have charged former heads of state with crimes. And they were all right. We will be all right as well if we are going to go down this uncharted path.
Anthony, thank you for that. Ellie, of course he's right. that we haven't seen the indictment because it's sealed, but 30-some charges. You know, you could connect the dots, can't you? There were several payments made by Michael Cohen. If you then factor in the election charges that would correspond to either, it seems to jive with what we think we know and who we've seen go through the door of the courthouse to testify in front of the grand jury.
Right. We don't know nothing. We don't have to throw our hands up and say who's to judge. I mean, we know the witnesses who've been in there. Michael Cohen has been quite outspoken about exactly what he's testified about. And we know that the heart of these charges, which there has been an indictment, will focus on those hush money payments. And, you know, I'm aware of the analysis that Anthony cites. It was put out by the Manhattan DA's office, I think, in anticipation of just this type of question. But that analysis, while it's useful to know those numbers, does not even begin to answer the core question. First of all, they give us the numerator, but not the denominator. They tell us how many cases they charged, but they don't tell us how many cases they passed on. Also, the analysis completely overlooks the fact that prosecutors have to use their discretion. They have to evaluate each case on its own merits. And if you look at that analysis, first of all, Michael, there's the legal problem that you and the Washington Post and the New York Times point out about state prosecutors charging a violation of federal election law. I think they're going to have a real legal problem there, too. But there's also the problem that if you look at those cases that were charged, the fact patterns are very different. All of those cases, virtually all of those cases, involve somebody falsifying business records, then taking those records outside of their organization, using those business records to steal money from a bank, from a lender, from an investor, from a customer. Here, we don't know that the Trump org ever took those documents outside of their organization. Seems like they were just in-house at Trump org. And then the campaign finance issue is completely different from a financial type theft that usually animates these cases.
Gentlemen, I'm limited on time. Here's a social media. Can we put this up on the screen? I don't know what's coming, but I'd like to lean on both of these fellas to see. Okay. Steve says, Trump just wrapped up the nomination with that indictment. He'll still lose the general. Anthony, you probably want to stay out of the politics, but do you want to say anything about that? What are the political ramifications of all of this?
Yeah, so I think what we've seen over the last 10 days or so is Trump rallying his base. I completely expect what we've seen over the last several days to continue, which is the Republican establishment continue to rally around him. I think Steve is right. This will help him in the short term politically. I don't know about the long term. I am from North Carolina. I spent a lot of time outside of the District of Columbia, and what I'm hearing from people is that they're ready to turn the page from all things Donald Trump. And I'm hearing that from Democrats and Republicans. And so I think, honestly, Steve may be onto something. This may help him with his base, but over the long term, I think it's a political loser.
Ellie, 10 seconds. Go ahead.
A lot of people are worried that prosecutors here collectively are leading with their chin with the weakest charge. I do place some of the blame on that on the United States Department of Justice. I've been saying for years now, they're 2+ years out by failing to bring January 6 charges or Mar-a-Lago charges in a timely manner. They've led to this situation where the weakest charge is going first.